But next, I'm going to get to the news, so stay tuned. Okay, so this bit of news today comes from an article that was making the rounds on R9K a little while back during February around Valentine's and whatnot. And it's actually connected with the thread of the day. So I thought it would be interesting because it's basically talking about a phenomenon that we've all been familiar with for years, but people often said that we were talking out the side of our necks and didn't know what we were talking about. But more and more evidence is showing that, this is the truth. But you see it right there, the headline: most young men are single, most young women are not. And so we're going to get right into this article. So right here it says more than 60% of young men are single, nearly twice the rate of unattached young women, signaling a larger breakdown in the social, romantic, and sexual life of the American male. Men in their 20s are more likely than women in their 20s to be romantically uninvolved, sexually dormant, friendless, and lonely. They stand at the vanguard of an epidemic of declining marriage, sexuality, and relationships that afflicts all of young America. So that's pretty much sums up a lot of the things that we were already aware of and talking about. And one thing that I'll say is that the reasons for this are it's definitely multiple different reasons for this, because I think on one hand you have guys like myself who would be considered MGTOW or voluntarily celibate, who could, guys like me, I could potentially put my hat in a dating race, but I just don't think that the options that are available to me would be worth it. And so you're seeing guys like myself who are just like, what I can get isn't really worth dealing with or putting in the effort for. Therefore, I'm going to remain single. But you also have some guys who really do want relationships, who are trying to have sex, but they don't have the skills necessary or the know-how to find dates, to find girlfriends, and to get laid and whatnot. Some of them have different sort of disadvantages that greatly reduce their dating options. We all know about things like the importance of height, how race plays a role in the dating options of men, your facial structure, but also as well as like certain personality traits and things like that can also inhibit your ability to have a decent number of good options in terms of dating. And then also when you look at like the friendless aspect of it, I think that's important as well. I was watching a video by O'Shea Duke Jackson because I think he covered this article or a similar article, and he was talking about how a lack of friends is connected to a lack of dating options as well. Because when you have friends, what do? Friends go out, and then when you go out, you're having the opportunity to meet people, to meet men, to meet women, and you can sort of connect or hook people up. Like, okay, maybe you don't know this girl, but I know her. When you come around me, she's around me, and then you guys meet, and then whoa, sparks fly. A lot of guys don't have those types of opportunities. And specifically they're talking about men in their 20s. When you get into your 20s and you're outside of the realm of school, especially if you didn't go to college or something like that, the number, like, okay, you're not in school, you're not in college, maybe you have a job, but you don't have a lot of friends. Even at work, generally speaking, it's frowned upon to overtly hit on women and flirt with women. So that's not really the proper environment for that sort of thing, even though it happens. So your options are limited unless you really take like that bold extra step to say, okay, I have to make changes in terms of my lifestyle so I can meet new people. So it continues to say, "We're in a crisis of connection," said Niobe Way, a psychology professor and founder of the Project for the Advancement of Our Common Humanity at New York University. Disconnection from ourselves and disconnection from each other, and it's getting worse. In the worst case scenario, the young American man's social disconnect can have tragic consequences. Young men commit suicide at 4 times the rate of young women. Younger men are largely responsible for rising rates of mass shootings, a trend some researchers link to their growing social isolation. And this is something that I've always talked about. And I say it semi-jokingly, but it's true. These guys who do these mass shootings, none of them are fucking bad bitches. I always say that. It's so important to point that out. These guys who do these mass shootings, they 9 times out of 10, they either have never had a girlfriend or they've never had an attractive girlfriend. They've never had a healthy relationship with a woman. And oftentimes they also tend to not have healthy relationships with other men in terms of friendship. So I think that the social aspect of what plays into someone doing things like that is definitely important, because I think it's one of those things where when you look at these people who commit mass shootings and do these terrible acts of violence seemingly randomly against random people, they always tend to have like this deficit in terms of their social skills, their overall social life, and accomplishments and things of that nature. Societal changes that began in the Eisenhower years have eroded the patriarchy that once ruled the American home, classroom, and workplace. Women now collect nearly 60% of bachelor's degrees. Men still earn more, but among the youngest adults, the income gap has narrowed to $43 a week. Scholars say the new era of gender parity has reshaped relationship dynamics, empowering young women and in many cases, removing young men from the equation. Women don't need to be in long-term relationships. They don't need to be married. They'd rather go to brunch with friends than have a horrible date, said Greg Matos, a couple and family psychologist in Los Angeles who recently penned a viral article titled "What's Behind the Rise of Lonely Single Men." And I think this is true, but it's also true for men as well. I don't know if this article is going to go into like the whole, like that subset of like MGTOW guys, like guys who basically feel the same way as this, that, you know, I don't need a long-term relationship. I'd rather have a dog because I just don't think it's fair to act like women are the only ones who feel that way, when it's obvious that when you look at the rise of the manosphere, red pill, and MGTOW, I mean, look, you can say what you want about it, whether you agree or not, but the fact that these guys are the topic of conversation for a lot of big social media influencers, YouTubers, bloggers, and whatnot, you know, these guys are making noise, whether people want to admit it or not. And so I think on one hand, part of it is definitely, you know, women gaining power in society. And I think that power has allowed them to disqualify a greater number of men, because it used to be that because the earning potential of women was so, I mean, quite frankly, pitiful, you know, just by virtue of you being a man who could go out, put some boots and gloves on and get busy and earn a livable wage, like that made you something that the average woman could look up to, you know. But now, and I'm not saying that this is a bad thing. I just think this is sort of one of the unintended uglier side effects of women gaining power, is that with that power, it's made it more difficult for men to really stand out to women. It's made it more difficult for men to, like, for men now, we have to work and elevate ourselves to an even higher level. That, I mean, average just isn't enough for a lot of women, because it's like they can at least reach that with ease and more. And so it's like that's why a lot of them will say, well, what do you bring to the table? You know, I already have money. I have my own apartment. I have my own car. And I think that's when women start to be more and more selective, because now it's like, it's not just, okay, I don't just want a guy with a job. I also now am free to select for other traits because I got my own money. So how about I get the guy who not only has the job in the car, but it's also 6'5", got the right kind of beard, got the right kind of nose, got the right kind of ball sack, all that, you know. And I think that's another aspect of it. Recent years have seen a historic rise in unpartnered Americans, particularly among the young. The pandemic made things worse. As of 2022, Pew Research Center found 30% of U.S. adults are neither married, living with a partner, nor engaged in a committed relationship. Nearly half of all young adults are single, 34% of women, and a whopping 63% of men. Now, the big elephant in the room, though, is like, how is it that how can so many women, like, you would think this wouldn't add up, right? How can 34% of women be single but 63% of men? And I think, and I'm not sure, but because I've read different forums so about this particular article, so I gotta do more research. But what people generally say is that men outnumber women, depending on the area of the globe, of course. But and really, I wouldn't even doubt that, because one thing like this, and this is just one example, right? Look at how you have this issue of mass immigration. When you see these people from other countries pouring in, don't you notice that 70, 80, 90% of them are men? And this is something that's just consistently happening throughout the year, especially in first world countries, just people pouring in. And the majority of them are adult age men. And this is probably skewing the balance in terms of the number of men versus the number of women in certain areas. I've heard some guys also present the harem theory, which is that, you know, women have that tendency of sharing the few top tier men amongst themselves. You know, that's always been kind of a debated theory. Now, I do know that there are, and believe that there is, you know, that certain tier of men who can juggle multiple women, but how many of them are doing that? And those women would say, I'm in a relationship. That's what I'm saying. Like, I know women do the, you know, just flock to Chad. So 20 girls for every Chad or something. Like, I know that happens, but typically they, like, somebody understands that I'm not in a relationship with this guy. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I get that theory, but how many women are really looking at it like I'm in a relationship just because I'm fucking this guy that I also know is fucking 10 other women, you know? Not surprisingly, the decline in relationships marches astride with a decline in sex. The share of sexually active Americans stand at a 30-year low. Around 30% of young men reported in 2019 that they had no sex in the past year, compared to about 20% of young women. Only half of single men are actively seeking relationships or even casual dates, according to Pew. That figure is declining. You have to think that the pandemic had an impact on some of those numbers, said Fred Rabinowitz, a psychologist and professor at University of Redlands who studies masculinity. I don't know, that's kind of funny to me. Young men are watching a lot of social media. They're watching a lot of porn, and I think they're getting a lot of their needs met without having to go out, and I think that's starting to be a habit. Now, see, I know that for sure, that I've always been able to satisfy my sexual cravings with masturbation and pornography. I'm not ashamed of it. I will boldly tell anyone that's how I've always dealt with my sexual. It works. I remember, and maybe this is like too much information, you know, TMI, but a few weeks ago, I was masturbating to some hentai. And I mean, this was some good shit. Like the art, the story was, one of those fucked up like train rape stories. I'm not, but anyway, Shikon, hentai, and I mean, I'm in another zone because I'm just impressed. I mean, I'm having a blast sitting here reading this story and masturbating and shit. And I had a moment of clarity, right? I had a moment of clarity where I was sitting there like, yo, this shit is fun. People always attach like this sadness and patheticness to porn. I was like, yo, I'm really having fun here, like with this hentai shit. I was having a blast because I mean, this wasn't like a quick fap. This wasn't like some sloppy fap. This was I set up and got ready for this shit and sat down and read the Doge and I'm really into it. Like I'm fapping the right way nowadays. And I was like, yo, like this shit is cool. Like I'm good. Fuck these bitches. And I do think that pornography, social media in terms, and social media can mean a lot because you have some guys, they go on Twitch and they sit in the chat rooms of these girls and, the back and forth they might have with them, in a way that's satisfying an urge, instead of going out and trying to talk to a girl, I'll go look at girls play Resident Evil 1 on Twitch. That's what I do. and maybe you're a guy who's into like ASMR stuff, whatever the case may be. There are a lot of options, not just pornography in terms of like scratching the itch. And if you want to have some sort of interaction with a girl, or maybe you just want to see a girl do some sexy things. Even seasoned researchers struggle to fully account for the relationship gap between young women and men. If single young men outnumber single young women nearly 2-1, then who are all the young women dating? Some of them are dating each other. 1/5 of Generation Z identifies as queer, and research suggests bisexual women make up a large share of the young adult queer community. So that's an option right there too. Young women are also dating and marrying slightly older men, carrying on a tradition that stretches back more than a century. The average age at first marriage is around 30 for men, 28 for women, according to census figures. And it's so funny because we have these debates about age gap relationships, but it's just like I said in that video that I made. For every man that's dating a younger woman, there is a younger adult woman who made a decision to be with that older man. Whether people want to acknowledge it or not, a lot of women just have an attraction to older men because older men typically are going to be more established. They're going to be more mature. And their whole energy and aura is just going to be more advanced than men of that woman's age. Every now and then I'll watch the Pineapple Show, which is like a speed dating show, primarily for like young black people, hosted by Melly Monaco on YouTube. And one thing I noticed about most of the girls up there is that they want to date an older guy. And it's like for them, it's a deal breaker. Like if the guy is even a year younger than them, it's a deal breaker. Almost as bad as if that guy was shorter than them or something like that. And it's not like, let's say for example, the girl is 25, right? It's not like she's demanding the guy be like 35 or something. But Melly would get specific and she'll say, well, what's your age, your age range? And typically they would like, again, let's say she's 25. They'll say something like, I want like the guy to be either my age, 25, or up to about 35. And the point there is that these girls are oftentimes basically saying that they're willing to date a man that's 5, 7, 8, 10 years older than them. Easily. And I think when I see stuff like that, it's clear that a lot of women just do have a point blank period attraction for older men. And so I think that a lot of the guys who are struggling in dating are obviously going to be in their 20s, and part of their struggles is because they're not only competing with their fellow peers, but they're also competing with men that the women their age view as being more attractive, because these men are more established and more mature, and just typically with age as a man, if you make the right decisions in life, as you get older and older, the masculine energy that you give off is going to become more and more intense and noticeable and vibrant as you age. And, that's going to give you an advantage when it comes to attracting women. Heterosexual women are getting more choosy. Women don't want to marry down to form a long-term relationship to a man with less education and earnings than herself, said Ronald Levant, professor emeritus of psychology at the University of Akron and author of several books on masculinity. In previous generations, young women entered adulthood in a society that expected them to find a financially stable man who would support them through decades of marriage and motherhood. Over the 1950s and 60s, that pattern gradually broke down, and today it is all but gone. Women are tiring of their stereotypical role as full-time therapists for emotionally distant men. They want a partner who is emotionally open and empathetic, the opposite of the age-old masculine ideal. Today in America, women expect more from men, Levant said, and unfortunately, so many men don't have more to give. Now, I feel like they're focusing on a lesser aspect of what women are looking for. This idea, I don't buy into it. I could be wrong, but I don't buy into the idea that the issue with women is that they want men who are emotionally open. And I don't think that's it. That's the politically correct answer, if you ask me. I think that the things that are attracting the attention of women, or the things that women are looking for that men are lacking in, is, quite frankly, and it's different things, but I think the genetic aspect of it is big. When you look at how choosy women are in terms of like a man's physical appearance, that's a big aspect of it. And I think it's also the financial and social aspect of it too, where I think that, and we've talked about this quite often, but because of social media, women are able to easily build themselves on these platforms. And then as the likes come in and the followers grow and their social media presence becomes bigger and bigger, I think that they start to try to look for guys who are on that level as well. I do think that in a weird way, because again, you can look at the financial aspect of it, you can look at the genetic aspect of it, and I think these are important. But I also think there's this new thing that's also becoming a factor, and I think is how much you have going on social media, because a lot of young women, they love social media. And then who are the guys that are going to attract their attention on social media? It's going to be the guys who got the followers. It's going to be the guys who know how to sell themselves on social media, guys posting themselves with stacks of money and inside of nice cars, traveling and things like that. And you have to understand, this is what women have access to. While women are on social media, they see these guys who are showing off these lavish lifestyles. And some of these guys are easily accessible to them. And so they're looking at them, and then they're looking at you in real life, and you just don't really measure up. In real life, you can't measure up to, if some girl is scrolling through Instagram or whatever, and she comes across like a YouTuber like Steph is Cold, and I'm sure whatever social media he got, he probably flaunting a lot of cool shit. How does an average guy that she works with in the grocery store compete with that? You know, and I think that's one thing that a lot of people got to understand too. I think the social media aspect of it is big too, where women just have access to these guys who are living lavish lifestyles, and the average guys who can't afford that or aren't living like that aren't really on their radar.